My name is Celia Miller and I am standing in the wings of a grand auditorium, the low murmur of 1,000 people a gentle roar in my ears. The leather of the binder in my hands is cool and smooth, a stark contrast to the frantic fluttering pulse in my wrist. In a few moments I will walk out onto that stage to deliver the keynote address for the annual Historical Society Prize, an honor that feels both surreal and inevitable. Out there, seated in the front row, is my husband, or rather my soon-to-be ex-husband, David. He and I are nominated for the same award tonight. His book, The Sovereign's Shadow, is the culmination of a celebrated career. My book, The Scribe's Confession, is the truth that brought that career to its knees. A year ago I was his shadow, his secret, the ghost in his intellectual machine. Tonight I am the main event. What would you do if the person you loved most stole your life's work and then, in front of the entire world, thanked you for keeping the house clean? Before I tell you about the speech I'm about to give, and the look on David's face when I deliver it, let me take you back to how it all began. And if you're watching this, I'd love to know where you're from, so drop a comment down below. If you've ever felt unseen or unappreciated, go ahead and hit that like button, and if you're new here, consider subscribing. You're in a community of people who understand that sometimes, the quietest voices have the most powerful stories to tell. It didn't start as a theft. In the beginning, it felt like a partnership, the kind of beautiful, all-consuming collaboration that academics dream of. We met in graduate school, two hungry minds devouring texts on the tutor period as if they were air. David had the charisma. He could hold a seminar room captive, weaving narratives that made dusty old monarchs feel alive and present. I had the patience. I was the one who could spend 14 hours in the sub-basement of a library, chasing a single footnote through crumbling manuscripts, my fingers gray with dust, my heart soaring when I found a thread no one else had seen. We were a perfect match. He was the handsome, soaring architecture of the cathedral. I was the unseen, intricate foundation holding it all up. Our marriage was an extension of that dynamic. We were a team. When he landed his first book deal, a biography of Thomas Cromwell, we celebrated with cheap champagne in our tiny, book-cluttered apartment. "We did it, Sel," he said, his eyes shining with a brilliance that I mistook for shared joy. "This is going to be our ticket." And it was. The advance wasn't huge, but it felt like a fortune. The work, however, was monumental. David, for all his narrative flair, had a weakness. He loathed the deep, tedious, granular work of primary source research. His mind was a sky full of brilliant, racing clouds, but he had no patience for the soil. That was my domain. I remember one particular weekend about 6 months into the project. He was in a state of utter panic. A whole chapter on Cromwell's early life in Italy was based on secondary sources, and his editor had called it thin, derivative. "I'm stuck, Sel. Utterly stuck," he groaned, pacing our small living room. "There's nothing new to say. It's all been written." He threw a stack of books onto the sofa in a rare show of temper. I waited until his frustration had ebbed, then I sat down with a cup of tea and the list of his sources. "What about the Florentine banking archives?" I asked softly. There were letters from English merchants mentioning a Tommaso, an ambitious young man working for the Frescobaldi Bank. No one's ever definitively proven it was Cromwell. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of hope and exhaustion. "But that's a needle in a continent-sized haystack. The records are in Italian, some of it in archaic dialects. It would take months." I just smiled. "I know. Let me see what I can find." For the next 6 weeks, my world shrank to the digital archives of Florentine banks and the interlibrary loan system. I spent my days teaching undergrad survey courses and my nights deciphering 16th-century Italian script, cross-referencing shipping manifests with private letters. David would bring me coffee, kiss the top of my head and say, "You're a miracle worker." He saw my work as a service, an act of spousal support like making dinner or doing the laundry. He didn't see it as my work. It was an ingredient for his work. And then at 2 in the morning, fueled by coffee and obsession, I found it. A letter from a Venetian wool merchant to his brother, complaining about a sharp, clever Englishman in the Frescobaldi employ, a man named Cromwell who had outmaneuvered him on a deal. It was the smoking gun, the definitive link. I didn't even wake David. I laid the printout of the translation on his desk and went to bed, my mind electric with the thrill of the discovery. The next morning he read it and his face broke into a triumphant grin. "Celia, you've done it. You've saved the book." He hugged me tightly, and in that moment the lines between his work and my work blurred into a warm, comfortable our work. He wrote the chapter in a single feverish weekend, weaving my research into a stunning narrative. When the book came out, the reviews specifically praised the groundbreaking research into Cromwell's early life. In the acknowledgments he wrote, "And to my brilliant wife, Celia, whose sharp eyes and endless support were my constant companions." It felt good. It felt like enough. But enough has a way of shrinking over time. The second book, On the Fall of Anne Boleyn, was where the system became formalized. By then we had our first child, a son named Leo. My own academic aspirations, a planned dissertation on the women of the Tudor court, were put on an indefinite hold. "It just makes sense, Sel," David had argued gently but firmly. "I have the momentum now. This is for the family. Once I'm established, you'll have all the time in the world for your own projects." It was a seductive logic, and exhausted from late-night feedings and the overwhelming love I felt for our son, I agreed. It was a practical decision. A temporary one. This time there was no pretense of him even attempting the initial research. I was given a budget and a mandate. I spent a summer in the British Library, a breast pump packed in my bag next to my notebooks, while David stayed home to hold down the fort, which mostly meant playing with Leo for a few hours before retreating to his study to read. In London I lived and breathed the 16th century. I found a cache of letters from a lady-in-waiting to Anne Boleyn, letters that had been miscatalogued and forgotten. They were intimate, revelatory, and they painted a picture of the Queen's final days that was far more nuanced and tragic than the popular narrative of the vengeful shrew. I transcribed them, translated the difficult passages, and wrote extensive notes on their implications. I essentially created the blueprint for the entire book. I would email him pages of raw material organized and annotated, and he would transform them into the polished, best-selling prose that was his trademark. The book was an even bigger success than the first. It cemented his reputation as the most exciting new voice in popular history. At a dinner party hosted by his publisher, a famous journalist cornered us. "David, your ability to unearth these hidden gems is just extraordinary," the man gushed. "That stuff about the lady-in-waiting, Eustacia, was a revelation. How do you do it?" I felt a small, hopeful flutter in my chest. This was it. This was the moment he would turn, put his arm around me and say, "Well, I can't take all the credit. My wife, Celia, is the real detective in the family." I even prepared my modest, slightly embarrassed smile. But the moment never came. David just laughed, a deep, confident sound. "You know, it's mostly about intuition," he said, tapping his temple. "You have to know where to look to feel where the story is hiding." He didn't even glance at me. I stood beside him, a decorative accessory to his genius, and smiled until my face ached. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. It wasn't our work anymore. It was his. I was just a resource. A highly effective, unpaid, and invisible one. This was the flaw in me, the one I can see so clearly now. I let it happen. I was so invested in the life we were building. The nice house in a leafy suburb, the excellent schools for Leo and later our daughter Maya, the financial security, that I convinced myself the arrangement was a fair trade. I was complicit in my own erasure. My parents, both practical people, saw David's success as my success. "You two are such a wonderful team," my mother would say, oblivious to the fact that I was the entire backstage crew and he was the only one taking a bow. Was I weak? Was I a fool for prioritizing our family's comfort over my own professional soul? For a long time I believed I was just being practical. I told myself that my contribution was silent but essential, like the roots of a great tree. I didn't realize that roots, when buried deep enough, can be forgotten entirely. The third book, A Sweeping History of the Elizabethan Court, was the pinnacle of our dysfunctional system. By now the children were in elementary school and my life was a whirlwind of school runs, parent-teacher conferences, and covert historical research. My study, a small room at the back of the house, was my sanctuary and my prison. It was filled with books I had written in a sense, but whose spines bore only his name. I developed a routine. I'd drop the kids at school, spend 6 hours immersed in espionage, courtly intrigue, and the spy networks of Francis Walsingham, then transform back into a suburban mom to pick them up, help with homework, and make dinner. David, meanwhile, was a public figure. He gave lectures, appeared on television documentaries, and cultivated his image as a brilliant, accessible historian. There was an incident that, in hindsight, was a perfect miniature of the disaster to come. He was being interviewed for a major magazine profile. The journalist was in our home, sitting in David's magnificent mahogany-paneled study, a room I had designed but rarely used. I was in the kitchen making coffee for them. The journalist asked David how he managed to write with such discipline. I heard his answer through the open door. "Well, I have a secret weapon," David said, his voice smooth as butter. "My tennis coach. Seriously. We play 3 times a week and an hour on the court completely clears my head. I solve all my most difficult plot points thrashing a ball around with him." I froze, my hand on the coffee pot. The chapter he was referring to, the one on the Babington plot, had been a tangled mess for weeks. He'd been completely lost. I was the one who had spent a weekend creating a massive timeline and a color-coded chart of the conspirators that finally untangled the narrative for him. I had solved it, right there in my little room at the back of the house, with a stack of books and a pot of lukewarm tea. My secret weapon was a library card. His was a tennis coach. I walked in with the coffee tray, my face a perfect mask of pleasant neutrality. He smiled at me, a warm, husbandly smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, and here's my other secret weapon," he said to the journalist, gesturing to me. "Celia, who keeps this whole operation running smoothly." The journalist smiled politely at the little wife with the coffee. I wanted to scream. Instead I just poured. So when his Elizabethan book, The Sovereign's Shadow, was nominated for the National Book Award, a part of me felt a grim satisfaction. This was the big one. The most prestigious literary prize in the country. This was a stage so large, so significant, that he couldn't possibly ignore my contribution. My hope was a stubborn, foolish weed. I told myself that the decade of silence had been a long-term investment, and the dividend was about to be paid. I bought a new dress, a deep emerald green silk that made me feel visible, substantial. On the night of the awards, sitting at the table with his agent and publisher, I felt a nervous thrill. The air buzzed with importance. David's hand was on my knee, but his attention was on the stage, his jaw tight with anticipation. I smoothed the silk of my dress over my knees and told myself that in a few minutes, everything would be different. He would win, and in his moment of ultimate triumph he would finally tell the truth. He would give me back my name. I was so focused on the fantasy of his redemption that I never once considered the reality of his character. I had spent 10 years studying the secrets of the dead, but I had failed to understand the man sleeping next to me. The man whose success I had authored and whose betrayal was about to be broadcast to the world. The moment his name was called, the table erupted. People were clapping David on the back, his agent was shouting with joy, and he was on his feet, his face a mask of stunned elation. He kissed me, a quick, distracted peck on the cheek, and made his way to the stage, moving like a man in a dream. I watched him go, my heart pounding in my chest. This is it, I thought. This is the moment it all becomes real. He stood at the podium, bathed in the warm, unforgiving light, the heavy bronze statuette in his hands. He looked out over the sea of faces, the most powerful people in the literary world, and he began to speak. He was, as always, magnificent. He was charming, witty, and humble. He thanked the awards committee, his voice thick with emotion. He thanked his agent, calling him a lion who had fought for the book from day one. He thanked his editor at the publishing house, a man he called his wisest counsel and most ruthless critic. He told a funny, self-deprecating anecdote about a research trip to London. My research trip. He talked about the loneliness of the writer's life, the long hours spent in silence, wrestling with the ghosts of the past. My long hours. My silence. My ghosts. With every word, the cold knot in my stomach tightened. I could feel the blood draining from my face. My hopeful smile felt like it had been chiseled from ice. Then he started winding down and I held my breath. He was getting to the personal thanks. "I have to thank my incredible support system," he said, his voice softening. "My parents who taught me to love books. My brilliant tennis coach, Marcus, who keeps my body as sharp as my mind." A ripple of appreciative laughter went through the audience. I felt a wave of nausea. The tennis coach again. The man he paid to hit balls at him was getting a public thank you on the national stage. And then he looked out, his eyes seeming to sweep right past me. He saved me for the very end, the final dismissive pat on the head. "And of course," he said, his voice swelling with practiced sincerity, To my wife Celia, who makes our house a home so I can do the real work. The words hit me not like a slap, but like the sudden, shocking silence after a massive explosion. The real work. The audience, interpreting this as a touching tribute to a devoted wife, burst into applause. A warm, generous, deafening wave of applause for his beautiful sentiment. They were clapping for the man who had just, in front of everyone who mattered in our world, reduced my entire intellectual and professional life to housekeeping. I sat there, paralyzed as the applause washed over me. I saw it all with a horrifying clarity. The 10 years of research, the thousands of hours in archives, the eureka moments, the carefully constructed arguments, the very bones of the book he was holding, all of it was not the real work. The real work was what he did, taking my raw genius and branding it with his name. I felt the emerald green of my dress turn to ashes around me. I didn't make a sound. I didn't cause a scene. While the applause was still echoing, I quietly pushed my chair back. His agent, seated next to me, gave me a congratulatory squeeze on the arm. "Isn't he wonderful?" he beamed. I just nodded, a brittle, meaningless gesture. I picked up my small evening bag, stood up and walked away from the table. No one seemed to notice. All eyes were on David, who was holding the statue aloft, basking in the glow of his triumph. I walked through the crowded ballroom, a ghost at the feast, and didn't stop until I was outside in the cold November air. The city noise was a balm after the suffocating applause. I hailed a taxi, the first one I saw, and as I gave the driver our address, I realized I had no intention of being there when he got home. I had him drop me at a hotel near the station instead. In the sterile anonymity of the hotel room, I took off the emerald dress, folded it neatly and placed it in the trash can. I had left the gala as his wife. By the time I checked out the next morning, I was simply Celia. The real work was about to begin. David arrived home from the gala around 2 in the morning, drunk on champagne and adulation. He didn't even notice I was gone until he stumbled into the bedroom and found it empty. He called my phone, which I had turned off. He sent a text. "Where are you? Party back at the house. Come home." It was so oblivious, so perfectly David, that I almost laughed. The next morning he called again, his voice a mixture of confusion and irritation. I answered. "Celia, what the hell is going on? I woke up and you were gone. Your mother called, she said you sounded strange." His tone wasn't one of concern for my well-being, but of annoyance that I had disrupted his victory lap. "I'm at a hotel, David," I said, my voice flat and steady. "A hotel? Why? Are you sick? Did you leave because you were feeling ill?" He was genuinely incapable of conceiving of any other reason. "I left because of what you said on stage." There was a pause. I could hear him breathing. "What I said? I thanked you. I called you my wife. You thanked me for making a home so you could do the real work." I said the words slowly, letting each one land in the space between us. I heard him sigh, a sound of profound exasperation. "Oh, Celia, for God's sake. It's a turn of phrase. It's what people say. You're being completely overly sensitive about this. It was the biggest night of my life, of our life, and you're going to ruin it over some misplaced semicolon in a speech." That was the moment I knew with absolute certainty that it was over. He didn't just not see me, he was constitutionally incapable of seeing me. "My work is not housekeeping, David," I said, the calmness in my voice scaring me a little. "My work is my work. And you've been putting your name on it for a decade." "That is not fair," he sputtered, his voice rising in indignation. "We are a team. I have never, ever denied that you are a brilliant researcher. You know I couldn't do it without you. But this is a partnership. You're taking a wonderful moment and twisting it into something ugly." Gaslighting. It was his final, most polished skill. Make me the crazy one. Make me the ungrateful one. "I'm not twisting anything, David." He held up a mirror, and for the first time I saw us clearly. "I'm done being the foundation for a cathedral that has no room for me inside. I'll have my lawyer contact yours." I hung up the phone before he could reply, my hand shaking not with fear, but with a strange, terrifying sense of release. I didn't go to my parents. They would have tried to patch things up, to smooth it over for the sake of the family. Instead, I went to the one person I knew would understand. Dr. Eleanor Vance had been my dissertation advisor in graduate school, a formidable, brilliant historian who had retired a few years prior. She lived in a small, book-crammed house 2 hours north of the city. I showed up on her doorstep with one suitcase and a shattered heart. She took one look at my face, said, "Oh, you poor child," and enveloped me in a hug that smelled of old paper and Earl Grey tea. Over the next few days I told her everything. Not just about the awards speech but about the entire decade. The system, the unspoken agreements, the slow-motion erasure. She listened patiently, her sharp blue eyes never leaving my face, nodding occasionally. She didn't judge me for my complicity. She didn't call me a fool. When I was finished, she poured me another cup of tea and said something that changed my life. "Well," she said, her voice crisp and clear, "it seems to me that the only honorable response to a historical injustice is to correct the record." He paused, letting the words sink in. "That Elizabethan book of his. Did you ever tell him about the letters from the Spanish ambassador's scribe?" My head snapped up. The scribe's letters. It was a primary source I had uncovered while researching the sovereign's shadow. A collection of personal letters from a junior scribe in the Spanish embassy in London, writing home to his brother in Madrid. They were filled with court gossip, but also with incredibly detailed observations about the power dynamics of Elizabeth's inner circle. Crucially, the scribe, a man named Mateo, argued that the true power behind the throne wasn't a single person, but a shifting coalition of second-tier nobles and merchants. A thesis that completely contradicted David's great man theory of history, which placed a single powerful nobleman at the center of all influence. I had presented the research to David, excited by its potential to revolutionize their understanding of the period. He had dismissed it. "It's a fascinating find, Sel," he'd said patronizingly, "but it's a dead end. A scribe? Who's going to care about the opinions of a nobody? The narrative needs a strong central pillar, not a web of gnats." He had taken some of the colorful anecdotes for his book but had discarded the core thesis entirely. He'd called it a distraction. He dismissed it, I told Eleanor, a flicker of old anger rising in me. He said it was too complicated, that it muddied the narrative. Eleanor smiled a slow, dangerous smile. "Good," she said. David's weakness was always his love of simple, elegant narratives. The truth is rarely simple or elegant. The truth is messy. And it seems to me, Celia, that you are in possession of a great deal of messy, beautiful truth. What are you going to do with it? That was the beginning. I spent the next year living in Eleanor's guest room, which was really just another library. I started from scratch. I obtained high-resolution scans of the scribe's letters. I lived and breathed his words, his observations, his astute ground-level view of a world that David had only ever seen from the clouds. The scribe, Mateo, became my confidant, my collaborator across the centuries. His voice, silenced for 400 years, became the engine of my own. I wasn't just writing a rebuttal to David's book. I was building a new history from the ground up, using the very materials he had discarded as worthless. The book poured out of me. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. There were days of crippling self-doubt where David's voice would echo in my head. Asterisk, who's going to care about a scribe? You're a nobody. Asterisk, but Eleanor was my rock. All historians are nobodies until they write the book that makes them a somebody, she'd say tartly, pushing another plate of toast and marmalade in front of me. Now get back to work. When the manuscript was finished, I titled it The Scribe's Confession. Finding a publisher was a battle. Several houses, including David's, rejected it out of hand. They were afraid to go up against a literary titan. They saw me as a bitter ex-wife with an axe to grind. The rejection letters were painful, each one a fresh wave of doubt. But Eleanor had a contact, a young, ambitious editor at a university press named Anya Sharma. Anya wasn't afraid of a fight. She read the manuscript in a single weekend. She called me on a Monday morning. "Celia," she said, her voice buzzing with an energy I hadn't felt in years. This is a hand grenade. It's not just a new interpretation. It dismantles David Miller's entire thesis. It's impeccably researched, brilliantly argued, and it's going to cause an absolute firestorm. We have to publish it. I sank into a chair in Eleanor's kitchen, tears streaming down my face. It was the first time in 10 years that someone in the professional world had seen my work, my actual work, and called it by its name. Anya and the press were magnificent. They knew the book would be controversial, so they had it peer-reviewed by the top Elizabethan scholars in the world, all under strict non-disclosure agreements. The reports came back unanimous. The research was sound, the argument was revolutionary. The day the scribe's confession was published, a year to the day after the National Book Awards, I was terrified. David had, through his lawyers, threatened to sue for defamation, but his case was non-existent. The book wasn't about our marriage. It was about history. It used primary sources he had chosen to ignore. The initial reviews were cautious, but then the tide turned. A major review in a national newspaper called it a stunning work of historical reclamation and a devastating, methodical correction to the historical record. The book found its audience. It started selling. It climbed the bestseller lists, an unheard-of feat for a dense academic history from a university press. It was the story that sold it, the overlooked scribe, the hidden truth. And simmering just beneath the surface, the story of the historian who had been overlooked herself. The nomination for the Historical Society Prize was the final, stunning vindication. And then came the invitation to be the keynote speaker. The irony was so perfect, so literary, it was almost painful. The woman who was thanked for keeping the house clean was now being asked to give the most important speech of the year to the very community that had once lionized her husband. And I knew with every fiber of my being that he would be there to hear it. And so, I find myself here in the wings of this auditorium, the binder containing my speech feeling heavier and more significant than any award. The stage manager gives me a 5-minute warning. My heart rate kicks up a notch. Through a gap in the curtain I can see the front row. There's Anya, my editor, giving me a small, fierce smile. There's Dr. Vance, looking regal and proud. And there, next to an empty seat that was supposed to be for his guest, is David. He looks smaller than I remember, diminished. His suit seems a size too big. His face is pale, his posture rigid. He is staring straight ahead at the empty podium, the very picture of a man waiting for his sentence to be read. A part of me, a small vindictive part I'm not proud of, wants to use this speech to destroy him. To lay out every personal betrayal, every stolen idea, every dismissive comment. I could do it. I have the platform and I have their attention. I could recount the story of the tennis coach and the coffee tray. I could make him a laughingstock. The thought is tempting, a flash of heat in my veins. But then I remember Eleanor's advice from that first terrible week at her house. This isn't about him anymore, Celia, she had told me, her voice firm. Revenge is a hot, messy fire. Vindication is a cold, clean, well-lit room. Build your room. My speech is not a fire. It is a room. It is a carefully constructed academic argument, built on the foundations of my own research, lit by the brilliance of a long-dead scribe. It is, in its own way, far more devastating than any personal tirade could ever be. Because it doesn't attack David Miller, the man. It simply and methodically dismantles the work of David Miller, the historian, rendering it irrelevant. The stage manager returns. 2 minutes, Dr. Miller, he says to me. The title feels new and right. The president of the Historical Society walks to the podium. His voice booms through the auditorium as he begins his introduction. A book that has truly redefined our understanding of the Elizabethan era, a work of breathtaking archival research and profound insight. It is my distinct honor to introduce our keynote speaker, the author of The Scribe's Confession, Dr. Celia Miller. The applause starts, a wave of genuine warmth and respect. It is for me, my name, my work. I take a deep breath, push aside the curtain and walk into the light. The walk to the podium feels 100 miles long. The applause is a physical force pressing against me. I keep my eyes focused on the lectern, a small island of wood in a vast sea of faces. I can feel David's gaze on me, a desperate, burning pinpoint in the crowd. I don't look at him. Not yet. I arrange my papers, adjust the microphone and wait for the applause to die down. The silence that follows is absolute, electric with anticipation. Every person in this room knows the drama playing out before them. They know who I am, who he is, and what hangs in the balance. Good evening, I begin, my voice clearer and stronger than I expected. I want to thank the Society for this incredible honor. To be here tonight as both a nominee and your keynote speaker is more than I could have ever imagined. I pause. Tonight I want to talk about silence. History as a discipline is often a conversation with the dead. We listen for their voices in letters, in diaries, in official records and forgotten margins. But what about the voices that were never recorded? What about the silences? The great unwritten histories of those who were present but not powerful? Those who saw everything but were themselves unseen. I let the words hang in the air. I can see people leaning forward in their seats. I still haven't looked at David. This part isn't for him. It's for me. For centuries, our understanding of the Elizabethan court has been shaped by a great man theory of history. It's a compelling narrative, one that centers on the singular influence of powerful figures like William Cecil or Robert Dudley. It's a story of kings and kingmakers, of singular, brilliant men bending the world to their will. It is an elegant story, but I believe it is the wrong one. Now I begin to build my room. For the next 20 minutes, I speak about Mateo de la Cruz, the Spanish ambassador's scribe. I do not present him as a curiosity, but as a vital historical analyst. I quote from his letters, his wry observations, his sharp-eyed assessments of the English court's factions. Mateo was not a great man, I say. He was, by the standards of his day, a nobody. He had no title, no land, no army. But he had two things that were far more valuable: proximity and perception. He saw the court not from the throne but from the corridors. He saw the whispers, the sidelong glances, the shifting alliances that happened in the shadows, far from the grand pronouncements of the powerful. He didn't see a single pillar holding up the crown. He saw a complex, intricate web. I lay out the evidence piece by piece. I connect Mateo's letters to shipping manifests, to tax records, to the private diaries of merchants. I show with relentless academic precision how the events that David's book attributed to the will of one great man were, in fact, the result of a dozen smaller interconnected decisions made by the nobodies that Mateo chronicled. I am not angry. I am not emotional. I am a surgeon coolly and methodically dissecting a faulty argument. The room is utterly silent, captivated. This is not a personal attack. It is a paradigm shift presented as a lecture. I can feel the intellectual weight of my argument settling over the audience, the sheer, irrefutable force of the evidence. I am taking apart the engine of David's career, screw by screw, and showing the audience that the central piston was a fiction. Finally, I reach my conclusion. I have laid out my case. I have established my authority. I have corrected the historical record. Now and only now do I allow myself to look at him. I lift my eyes from my notes and find him in the front row. His face is ashen. He looks like a man who has just watched his own ghost walk across the stage. His hands are clenched into white-knuckled fists on the table in front of him. He knows, and everyone in the room knows, that his life's work has just been rendered obsolete. I take a slow breath. The work of a historian, I say, my voice softening slightly, my gaze locked on his, is a sacred trust. We have a duty to the evidence, a duty to the truth, no matter how messy or inconvenient. And we have a duty to acknowledge all the collaborators who make our work possible, whether they are the long-dead scribes who left us their words, or the living partners who share our journey. The silence in the room is so profound I can hear the hum of the stage lights. And so, I want to end by offering a personal word of thanks. The audience thinks I am concluding with a standard nicety. David looks like he is about to be physically ill. I want to thank my former partner, David Miller. A collective, silent gasp seems to pass through the auditorium. I want to thank him for showing me, in the most public and dramatic way imaginable, the profound, non-negotiable importance of signing your own name to your own work. I let the sentence land. I don't smile. I don't smirk. I just hold his gaze. The double meaning is a blade, perfectly honed, and it slides into the heart of the matter without drawing a single drop of blood. It is an accusation and a declaration of independence, all wrapped in the guise of a thank you. For a few eternal seconds, there is absolute stunned silence. No one breathes. David is frozen, a statue of humiliation. And then someone in the back begins to clap. The sound is tentative at first, then it is joined by another, and then the entire room, 1,000 people, rises to its feet, and the applause is not just polite or appreciative. It is a roar. It is a tidal wave of understanding, of vindication, of triumph. It is for the scribe. It is for me. I look at David one last time, a man being drowned in the sound of my success, and I give a small, formal nod. The work was real. And it was mine. The standing ovation went on for what felt like an eternity. I stood at the podium, my hands resting lightly on the wood, and let it wash over me. It was a cleansing sound. When it finally subsided, I gathered my papers and walked back off stage, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. Anya and Eleanor were there waiting for me, their faces shining. Anya threw her arms around me. That was biblical, she whispered in my ear. Eleanor simply took my hand and squeezed it, her eyes glittering with unshed tears of pride. A perfectly lit room, my dear, she said. Perfectly lit. The reception afterwards was a blur of faces and voices. Dozens of people, historians I had only known by reputation, came up to congratulate me. They didn't just praise the speech. They wanted to talk about the book, about Matteo, about the implications of my research. My work was the topic of conversation. I was no longer an appendage to David. I was the center of my own intellectual gravity. I saw him across the room, adrift in a sea of people who were studiously ignoring him. He looked lost, a king in exile. A few of his old cronies stood near him, but even they seemed to be keeping a respectful distance, as if his failure were contagious. He tried to catch my eye a few times, a desperate, pleading look on his face, but I was always surrounded, shielded by a circle of new colleagues and old friends. He couldn't get to me. The invisible wall that had once separated me from the world was now protecting me from him. One of the most powerful moments came when a man named Professor Albright, a titan in the field of Tudor studies, approached me. He was in his late 70s, a man whose books I had studied in awe as a student. He had written a glowing review of David's The Sovereign's Shadow years ago. He came up to me, his expression grave. "Dr. Miller," he began, his voice raspy with age. "Celia. Your book. And that speech tonight. It was magnificent. Truly. It's not just a correction, it's a new beginning for the field. I was wrong. I overlooked the truth because David's version was a better story. I am deeply sorry." The apology coming from him meant more than any prize. It was the validation of the community, an admission that they too had been seduced by a simple narrative and had missed the complex truth I had uncovered. Then came the moment for the prize announcement. The president of the society returned to the stage. The murmur in the room died down. "And now for the Historical Society Prize for the Book of the Year," he announced. "The nominees are The Gilded Cage by David Miller." A smattering of polite, obligatory applause. David stood a little straighter, a flicker of his old hope animating his face. "And The Scribe's Confession by Celia Miller." The applause was immediate and sustained. The president beamed. He opened the envelope. "And the winner of this year's Historical Society Prize is The Scribe's Confession by Dr. Celia Miller." The room erupted. Anya screamed with delight next to me. Eleanor was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. I felt a moment of pure, unadulterated shock, followed by a wave of joy so profound it almost buckled my knees. I made my way to the stage again, this time to accept a prize that was unequivocally mine. I took the heavy, ornate award, a beautiful bound book cast in bronze. I looked out at the same audience, and this time my speech was short. I thanked the society. I thanked Anya for her courage and Eleanor for her wisdom. I thanked the peer reviewers who had validated my work. And then I dedicated the award. "I dedicate this to all the forgotten collaborators," I said. "To the archivists, the librarians, the translators, and the scribes. To everyone working in the quiet places whose names we may not know, but whose labor forms the foundation of everything we claim to understand. Thank you." I didn't mention David. The most complete erasure I had learned is not to be attacked but to be omitted. I had written him out of his own story just as he had once tried to write me out of mine. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. It was quiet and uncontested. His professional reputation was in tatters and he had no fight left in him. A month after that he asked to meet for coffee. I agreed, not for him but for me. I needed to close the final page of the book. We met in a neutral cafe downtown. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, and his eyes were shadowed with a fatigue that seemed soul-deep. He stumbled through an apology, a clumsy, self-pitying mess of words. "I never meant for it to go that far, Sel," he said, staring into his coffee cup. It started small and then it snowballed. The success, the praise, it was a drug. I got addicted to it. I lost sight of everything." "You lost sight of me," I said, not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact. "Yes," he whispered. "I did. I was a fool. And I'm sorry. I truly am. Is there any way we can be friends? For the kid's sake." I looked at him, at this diminished man, and I felt not anger, not even pity, but a profound sense of distance. He was a figure from a past I no longer inhabited. His apology might have been genuine, or it might have been another form of manipulation, a desperate attempt to cling to some part of the life he had lost. I realized it didn't matter. "I accept your apology, David," I said, and I meant it. "I accept it so that I can be free of it. We will be civil for our children. We will be polite at their graduations and their weddings. But we will not be friends. That part of our story is over." I stood up, put enough money on the table for both our coffees, and walked out into the sunshine without looking back. My new life is quieter than my old one and infinitely more satisfying. I have an office at the university with my name on the door. Dr. Celia Miller. I teach graduate seminars on archival research and early modern history. I spend my days surrounded by bright, eager students, many of them young women, and I make it a point to champion their work, to ensure their voices are heard and their contributions are credited. I am writing a new book, this time on the female spies in Elizabeth's court, and every word of it is a joy. My life is not defined by service to a man's ego, but by the pursuit of my own passion. The house I live in is smaller, but the rooms are all mine. Sometimes I think about the irony of it all. David's greatest public triumph was the speech that destroyed him. His most damning insult, that I only made a home so he could do the real work, was the catalyst that forced me to finally do my own real work under my own name. He handed me the key to my own prison cell and told me it was a gift. It took me a year of pain and fury and relentless effort to realize it wasn't a key to the cell, but a key to the entire world outside it. I don't know if I would have ever found the courage to leave without that final, public humiliation. In a way, he gave me my freedom, and for that, in the strangest sense of the word, I suppose I am grateful. The journey was long, and for 10 years, I allowed my own voice to be silenced in exchange for a comfortable life. I learned that your value isn't determined by whose name is on the cover. It exists independently whether anyone acknowledges it or not. The most important work you will ever do is to claim it for yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to read about your own experiences in the comments below. Have you ever been underestimated or had your contributions overlooked? How did you find your voice? Don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and please subscribe for more stories of resilience and reclamation. Remember, sometimes the people who believe in you the least end up being your greatest motivation. Be well and never, ever let anyone else sign their name to your life.